I'd like to digress a little bit. I have some hesitation of sharing some of the following things because it's my story, and this class is really about his story. However, as the director of the school and somebody who teaches within it, I think there's that it has some merit or helpfulness for you to understand why I feel so strongly about it and how my life was changed. As I said in the previous clip, I was saved when I was 4. I grew up in a God-fearing family, a Mennonite background. I loved sports from my youth. I played stuff as an elementary school kid. My brother was an athlete. My dad, though he grew up on a farmer, baseball. I remember baseball stories that he would tell on their off days and Sundays. And he loved sports. I went to games, professional games, college games, high school games. I was immersed in it. It was for me, it was a love. At times, it was idolatrous over the evolution of the following decades, and that's not a good thing. And we'll address that also here, as we did in the first course. But the Lord transformed me, even in my passion for sports that did not glorify God in my youth and my pursuit of it, that was consumptive and problematic for my walk with God and my walk with people. That's a whole other thing I'm not going to get into, other than to say that my frame of reference was sport. And I knew it as the world taught it. I didn't have coaches that were bad. I can't remember bad coaches at all in youth or high school. I don't remember disliking the process because of the coaching. I enjoyed all of my experiences. I did not have a coach that was I considered mean-spirited and destructive until my college days, thankfully not at Pacific Lutheran University. And so I had good experiences. Nonetheless, they were specifically all tied to outcome-based. They were tied to winning and productivity, and we've talked about that at length. And we'll talk about it, I'm sure, here again. And it was the world's way. It wasn't inherently wicked or evil. It might have been selfish. It might have been self-absorbing. It might have certainly been about ego and all things that are oriented with that can be very twisted. That were not about building others up. And that wasn't one of the desires. That wasn't one of the targets. It was just you play, you have fun, you hope you play well, you want to win, you want to be the best, you want to start, all that kind of stuff that's normal. It's not necessarily inherently bad motivation. We would just consider it a poor use of sport in terms of advancing the kingdom. The bottom line is, at some point in my latter high school years, I ran across the book that I alluded to. And in reading it, the Holy Spirit came alive to me in a way that I'd never heard or seen previously. And I became a different guy as the Spirit of God was unleashed within me to play through me, rather than me just playing according to my word, by my power, for my glory. Because frankly, that's what it was. I wanted to start, I wanted to play, I wanted to be the star. I cared about the team, but frankly, I would have rather I played well and the team lose than I played poorly and the team win. That it was still about me. I don't think that's a foreign concept. I think that would be a natural outcome of philosophies that exist in the world, whether they're Christian or otherwise. And that was how I viewed sport. And then the Holy Spirit in His goodness grabbed me through a book. It just fascinates me that without a human mentor or somebody walking with me or giving me a picture, that I read something that the Spirit of God opened my eyes. And I became a guy that then saw the process as worship. This is a huge concept. Sport is worship. Practice is worship. Preparation is worship. Game is worship. Success is worship. Failure is worship. All aspects of the sport experience can be worship. I believe it'd be His will that it was worship. That's our understanding. Is His will was that He be glorified in worship in all aspects of it. On the field, off the field, in season, off season, practice, game. You play. You don't play at all. You're a backup. You're a bench warmer. You never even get into the competitive experience in a game setting. All of those are opportunities for evangelism and discipleship to take place. All of them are opportunities for worship of God, for putting to death self. Even if, in this philosophy, you weren't a Jesus follower and couldn't tap into his power, or your target wasn't his glory, if you even participated within this philosophical position, your life was enhanced. Just as, to use an Old Testament metaphor, when Israel was coming into the promised land, the Lord allowed Gentiles, non-Jews, to be part of the community. But they then had to abide by the parameters and the boundaries and the commandments and the principles that Israel practiced. In the same way, this philosophy works both in the context where people confess Jesus and in the context when they don't. The cool thing about this is that it's fully effective at the highest level, even in a public forum, at a public school, in normal youth sports, in a professional team whose goal is driven by winning and success and making money. All those places, this philosophy can integrate, infiltrate, and produce outcomes that both glorify him and enhance the experience for player and coach and outer circle alike. This is our experience. It's just not our opinion. It's our experience, which obviously drives our opinion. I don't ever remember hearing anything about faith in sport. I do remember sometimes. I remember going to a Billy Graham crusade in 1968 in Oakland, California, where a guy named Joe Orduña, a Nebraska football player, came up and gave his personal testimony. But my experience of the integration of sport and faith in my youth would be somebody giving a testimony or testifying, or he won something or succeeded, and so people asked him, they put a microphone in front of him, or they asked him to talk about his relation with Jesus. But there wasn't a practical articulation of what it'd be like to play by his power, for his glory, according to his word. There wasn't a 2x4 articulation. There was a guy who loved God. I don't even know what his walk was like. A guy who loved God, who wanted to acknowledge and honor God, who played and had success. This is what it looked like. This was sport and Christianity. It had nothing to do with the actual play that you could see. It was never articulated that way, or the way to coach. Certainly not how the outer circle might view it. It was all about the game and winning and outcomes. We would see outcomes as a byproduct that is not the target, let alone a target. It's an outcome that's a byproduct of a process that at every level is driven by the 2x4 principle. This was not something I had a frame of reference for. So thus, coming upon the Handbook on Athletic Perfection struck me. And somehow in the wisdom and in the crazy mystery of God, I went from a booklet that changed the way I prepared and thus changed my play. So I went from a guy who frankly was passive and was motivated only by the carrot of playing time and playing well and performing at as high a level as I could. I went from that guy to a guy that understood this was about worship, and the Holy Spirit wanted to fuse me with supernatural power to worship him, which then enhanced my play as a byproduct, because I was now playing with, practicing, preparing with a whole heart, a clear mind, a strong will, and great passion that was never there before, because my natural flesh nature would only be motivated by outcomes that glorified me. And now I had the capacity to have supernatural power toward outcomes that glorified him, regardless of the outcome of the contest. This was new territory. And it grabbed me. The Spirit of God in his goodness grabbed me. And then to go from a handbook which taught me about his ability and desire to play and live through me, to a place where it was being practiced in the in-season, off-season, practice field, game field, in all expressions of sport, as happened for me under Frosty Western at Pacific Lutheran. It was just, I stumbled in the goodness of God into spiritual Disneyland, where there was a world out there I'd never heard of or seen before that had transformational impact, not only personally, vertically for me in my relationship with Jesus, but then it impacted me horizontally with others as I moved from it's not about me, it's about others. It's about Him. It's about the kingdom, which has then had impact through the 45 years since I played there, or just under 45 years since I played there, has had a ripple effect of anybody I've coached or conversed with in the sport or life context, because they were integrated. They weren't separate. It wasn't a conversation only with athletes that people cared about athletics. It bled over into everything. It bled over to my own evangelistic bent and discipleship bent, and sport was the vehicle that integrated sport and faith and brought transformational change. Competing 2x4. It was sport through the filter of Scripture. It's a radically different worldview through sport. Again, as I'm going to repeat this because I fear God about implying, which unfortunately almost can't help but happen. I fear God in implying that this is the best way or the only way, or that everybody should do it this way or think this way. I'm appealing to consider that. Absolutely. I'm not hesitating in that regard. But you need to follow God if you confess His name, and you need to do sport the way He asked you to. All we would say is consider that your philosophy of competition be driven by the Scriptures, and if anything you're doing or saying is in conflict with the Scriptures, that it be pulled off the table. That the desire would be tapping into the Holy Spirit as the power and not your own training and preparation, which is part of it, right? A human who doesn't know God can have phenomenal capacity mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. We see that in our country, just thinking about Navy SEALs or Army Rangers or people in those fields which unrelated to sport. The human capacity by its own power and energy is phenomenal. But what would it be like if the God of the universe lives inside that person and can leverage those things that God has put within that person already in his natural man? And of course, if a person doesn't have the Spirit of God, and if he does have those traits that are transformational on this planet, but they can't be leveraged for eternity, and the person goes to hell, that's not a win. We've talked about that heavily in the last class. If this is just about this planet, no matter how noble and awesome and inspiring it is, it's a bad end. It's a bad outcome in terms of what really matters, which is life and eternity, because you're going to be somewhere forever. Once you're conceived, you're going to be somewhere forever, either with God in heaven or separate of Him in hell. And heaven is far greater than we can imagine, and hell is far worse than we can imagine. And so we want to leverage sport to enhance life eternal. And the cool part about it is it doesn't diminish any of the experience on this planet. It actually enhances it at a freaky level, even if you don't have the Spirit of God, because of the lessons learned that are productive in terms of values and humanity, and what can promote civil society at the highest level with all the capacity that God gave humans in their natural selves.